Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lawrence Friedman. I'm Professor of Law Studies here, but I'm also one of the Vice Chairman of the Trustees of the Little Heart Centre and the Military Archive. It's my very pleasant duty on behalf of King's College to welcome you here. Thank you all for coming, and I think it is a tribute to the enthusiasm which this cause has created that so many people have come today. The Little Heart Centre is very pleased to be associated with this, with the attempt to get Bletchley going, and so people can see what it's achieved as a more contemporary but still a military historian. I'm very well aware of the difference that the revelations about what went on at Bletchley made to the academic study of the Second World War, and we'll be hearing more of that later. So all I wish to do is to thank you all very much for coming, to welcome you to King's, and I'm going to hand you over to Professor Peter Pulis, who's the Chairman of the Bletchley Park Trustees and also the Director of the Montfort University of Milton Keynes, who will be taking a further look at today's proceedings and introducing our main speaker. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Deputy Mayor, my lords, ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished guests. May I first of all thank Professor Friedman for his kind welcome and for the support which the Little Heart Centre has given to the Bletchley Park Trust. May I welcome all of you to the launch of this appeal tonight, and may I thank you at this stage for being here. The historic importance of Bletchley Park to this country, and indeed to the world, cannot be overstated. Sir Harry Hinsley is going to address us tonight, and I'm sure that when he does, he will stress these points much better and explain them much better than I could ever do. Sir Harry, I know, is well known to many of you, as he is also a patron of Bletchley Park, of which I'm privileged to be the chairman. The Trust recognises the role played by the park during the Second World War, but perhaps more importantly, honours the code breakers and others who worked there at that time. It also recognises the development on site of the world's first electronic computer, albeit one that was specially dedicated to code breaking. And I think I should perhaps stress my particular interest, because I'm actually a professor of computer science, which is the way that I came to be involved with the Bletchley Park Trust in the first place. The machine, obviously, is called Colossus, and it was the forerunner of today's computing industry. And heavens, hasn't that affected all our lives, including mine, such a lot. Turning now to the appeal. The launch of this appeal is to assist the Trust in its stated aim of acquiring Bletchley Park for the nation, and to preserve this important part of our national heritage as a tribute, most importantly, to the intellectual effort which dramatically shortened the war and saved countless lives on both sides. There is no tribute, as far as I can see, that has been paid to that effort so far, and it's important, I believe, that we now take that opportunity and preserve the park in the form that we want to do. I'm pleased to say that the view is supported in many quarters, not least of all by the Borough of Milton Keynes, which is enthusiastic in its support for the Trust's aims to purchase the park and establish a complex, or as we've called it, a campus of museums on the site. Possibly that will be the first of its kind in the world. The proposed museums of cryptology, of computing, and of air traffic control, among others, will use the existing fabric of the park, which still, as many of you are aware, exists today exactly as it did in the 1940s. This infrastructure coupled with the modern techniques and technology available through, for example, the Science Museum, will create a living campus, a very exciting and innovative spectacle, a tribute to the so far unrecognised area of our national heritage. The Trust is now a little over 6 months old, and it is very grateful indeed to the supporters for their kind donations, without which we could not have maintained our day-to-day operations so far, and particularly to Milton Keynes Marketing for their support, without which we wouldn't be here tonight. Thank you. The appeal is to raise monies for the potential purchase of the park and the museum development, which will cost us several £million. I am pleased to report that a major financial institution is extremely interested in the project. I don't think I'm allowed to say any more than my script says that, and I better not deviate. However, we do need to raise funds for both the initial development costs, but also from this appeal, if we can reduce the trust borrowings that we need to acquire the park, then the future of the museum complex is assured. There are commercial activities on the park which will raise revenue money, and if we can reduce the borrowings, those revenue monies will underpin the museum complex. The museums we at this stage, I believe quite rightly, are viewing as a revenue drain. So we have to underpin them financially. I think it's worth saying that more details of those, I'm sure Ted is going to give those later in his speech. And we are confident, not least of all because our financial advisors to Ross have confirmed it, that the Bletchley Park campus can and will be commercially viable. Distinguished guests, tonight is the opportunity for you to help us, to play a significant part in saving what is arguably one of the most important sites of this country's recent history. We are asking you to go from here, to spread the word that Bletchley Park must be acquired for the nation, that its fabric must be preserved, and that its cultural heritage of this country will be enriched by our plans. Some of you I know have already helped us, financially and in many other ways, and I give you my sincere thanks. To those yet to help, or those of you who want to help some more, either as individuals or corporately, I have to get that bit in, I said. Please be generous if you are able. Members of the Trust Management Committee are at the back of the hall to assist you with their donations or pledges. I've seen some covenant forms tonight, I will add. Yes, this is a cry for help. We do need a lot of help if we are going to achieve our aim of securing the park. It is a cry for help, and we're asking you, please, please help us now. That's my bit done. Thank you for listening. I would now like to introduce Sir Harry Hinsley, who will give us a short address outlining the historic importance of Bletchley Park and Ultra in the winning of the Second World War. Sir Harry.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, as I must be brief, I can't describe for you the very long and arduous process by which, with the help of its Polish and French and American counterparts, Bletchley Park got to the position by which, from the autumn of 1941 to the end of the war, it led at any one time some 50 axis high-grade ciphers, many of them variations of the enigma, but by no means all of them so, and decrypted something like 4,000 signals a day. Now, I therefore have to confine myself to the question of the value of those signals, the impact that those signals had when they were received by the Allied governments and commands, who got them under the code names which have since become famous, legendary perhaps, Ultra and Magic. With the single exception of the area bombing of Germany, every Allied campaign from the autumn of 41 was assisted by these decrets. And in almost every battle, the Allies derived some advantage from them. This must be clear from the very volume of the signal that were being obtained. But to what extent did the Allies derive advantage? And with what results? Answers to that kind of question call, of course, for a great deal of painstaking analysis. And they will perhaps always remain open to argument and debate. But some pretty general, but nevertheless important conclusions have, I think, already emerged. On the one hand, to take my first or couple of conclusions, we can at once dismiss the claim that Ultra won the war. From the date which I've quoted for you, you will see that the British survived with little benefit from it before Germany took the offensive against Soviet Russia. And that since those offensives by Germany were failed and were so quickly followed at the end of 1941 by the entry of the United States, we may safely conclude that the Allies would have won the war even if they had not obtained by that time this massive superiority in intelligence. But the end of the war was then still 3.5 years away. And this is such a length of time that it might persuade us to jump to the opposite extreme and conclude that far from producing on its own the Allied victory, it made very little difference to it. And I ought to add that some people have inferred the same thing from the fact that the Axis never suspected that its highest grade ciphers were being, in that way, obtained. But this second, the alternative introduction, can equally firmly be dismissed, leaving aside the impact of the difference in the Pacific. I have to leave them aside because there the exploitation of them was in American hands. The work done at Bletchley, which culminated in the dispatch of this volume of signal to the French, saved the war, shortened the war by 2 years, and probably by 3. Now, the steps. I have to show some steps by which those conclusions are arrived. First of all, even if it didn't help to keep Rommel out of Egypt at the end of 1941, which it probably did, it certainly did so in the summer of 1942, when these ultra signals alone prevented him from exploiting his victory at Gazala. And even if the Allies had still gone forward that autumn with the landing in France, North Africa, the loss of Egypt, which would have been followed, of course, by the elimination of Malta, would have set back the conquest of North Africa and the reopening of the Mediterranean by at least a year, probably more, from the spring, from May 1943, when it was accomplished, to something the summer of 44, at the very least, if it had been the strategy to recover the Mediterranean. And of course, to delay their lives in that theatre so long would have necessitated their deferment of the cross-channel invasion. Now, of course, the Allies, in the circumstances which I just supposed that would have followed from Rommel reaching Cairo, might alternatively have cancelled French North Africa, turning their backs on the Mediterranean and sought the earliest possible invasion across the Channel, which is what the Americans would have preferred to do at all times anyway. But even then, even in that context, the prospects for the second front across the Channel would not have been very bright. If Ultra had not existed, they would in fact have been extremely weak. Ultra alone had prevented the U-boats from dominating the Atlantic in the winter of 1941-42. After performing the same service again in the winter of 42-43, it contributed heavily, first to the defeat of the U-boats in the Atlantic in April 43, and then to the Allied success in so crippling them for the rest of that year and for the period right up to overlord, that they were never again able to return to the convoy. And in the last year before the second front, the Allies stepped up the cycle of convoys and the size of convoys, and were able to do so in the knowledge that the Atlantic was completely or virtually completely free of U-boats, and that if it had not been, they would have known where they were. And then, it is, of course, arguable that in the rate, those in the rate of shipbuilding and the destruction of U-boats, the Allies would still have prevailed in the end without those victories which they owed to Ultra. But they would not have prevailed in time for the launching of the second front in 1944, even if they had given it priority over the Mediterranean. And it is, in my view, not unreasonable to believe that it would have had to be deferred until 1946. Now, it may be argued that it was only by stripping of the Pacific delay of that kind could have been short. I'm supposing all the time, of course, the absence of order. But if an undefeated U-boat command had delayed the invasion only by months, supposing that we say it had been able to delay it only to the spring of 45, other considerations would have come into play to make life extremely bleak for the Allies. As it was, the invasion of Normandy was carried out in the summer of 44 on such tight margin that it would have been impracticable, or it would have failed if it had been attempted, without the extremely precise and reliable intelligence provided by Ultra for months in advance about German strengths in the air, at sea, and on land, and about the detailed order of battle of the German front. That intelligence did its first service for Overlord by forcing the Allies to increase the strength of it, to double the strength of it in January 43. Without doubt, they would probably have attempted it if they hadn't been put off completely by that information with totally inadequate force. But these other considerations would have come in if the thing had been deferred, even though so briefly as till the spring of 45. The V-weapon offensive would have been in full swing. Germany would have finished the Atlantic War. The invasion of Normandy caught her in the middle of England. From early in 1945, she would have brought into service. We knew she was bringing into service revolutionary U-boats to which the convoy system was no answer, and to which the Allies had no answer. And she was bringing into service at the same time jet and rocket aircraft in advance of the Allied development of such planes. And unless the Allies had incurred still further delay by undertaking diversionary operations, Germany would not, in this situation, have had to disperse large forces to hold the Mediterranean or a Norwegian front, whereas in the situation that did in fact exist, the Allies were able to tie down something like 28 divisions in Italy alone. Now, summing up, it's not, I think, unreasonable to argue that without Bletchley's work, the second front would have been postponed much longer than 45. Probably. Certainly in 46. And probably in 47. In pretty horrible conditions. Or it would have been either heavily resisted, so that the Normandy fighting would have had something like the character and the duration of the Tunisian campaign, or it would have been repulsed. We carried out earlier, and the result of being repulsed would have been a longer war. Now you will see from my remarks that not only, as I said already, detailed analysis is required for an answer to the questions I have addressed, but also some slight degree of imagination. But I hope the imagination that I have exercised has not been unrealistic. If I ask some other question, we are in a different, as they say, I think almost to say, ballgame. In the circumstances that I suppose would have existed in Ultra had existed, the Allies would have been idle, of course. But who can say what other strategies they would have pursued? Who can say whether the Soviets would have defeated the Germans, or the Germans the Soviets, or there would have been stalemate on the East? What would have been done about the atom bomb? Now, nobody can answer that kind of question, and I don't think it would be legitimate for a historian to use his imagination. but fortunately their time but do not arrive because the war went as it did. And not the least reason why the war went as it did is to be found in the contribution made to the war effort by Bletchley. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sir Harry, for that splendid address, which I think clearly demonstrates the historic importance of the work done at Bletchley Park. It's now my pleasure to introduce Tony Sale, who is the museum's advisor to the Trust. Tony is going to outline the historic development of the park, its current status, and give details of the proposals that the Trust have for its development. Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm told I have to wear this horrible thing because I'm going to be some distance away from the microphone there. I also need a pointer. A little bit about myself. I have been 30 years in computing, and I have an early career in electronics and radar. I now work for the Science Museum, and my main task there is to restore some very elderly computers back to life. Since I myself passed the sell-by date a year ago, I am now employed 4 days a week at the museum, which leaves me 1 day a week for this splendid work with the Bletchley Park Trust. Now, the start of the story really was in January 1991, when the Bletchley Archaeological Society, so the Bletchley Archaeological and Historical Society, to give it its correct term, under the chairmanship of Ina Halmos, who's here with us tonight, found out that the park, Bletchley Park, was due for sale by the present owners, and there was the threat of all the buildings in the park being demolished and the park sold for redevelopment. They, as a local historical society, started to investigate the possibilities of at least saving some of the buildings in the park, and they consulted myself regarding the history of computing in the park, in particular Colossus, about which more later. I first visited the park in July 1991, and although I have actually had a previous career on the fringes of intelligence work, I'd never actually visited BP, and so it was quite an eye-opener for me to see where all this work went on, which I'd heard about during the war. When I walked around the park, I was immediately struck by the possibilities of using some of the existing buildings for museums of cryptology and computing. Primarily, this would form a home for the Computer Conservation Society, which I started at the Science Museum to assist me in my work in restoring computers. When I had this idea, I approached Property Holdings, who are one of the joint owners of the park, and with a view to finding out whether it was possible to purchase some of the buildings and set them up as a museum. Their reply to me was a rather polite, please get lost. They felt that any selling of a portion of the park would depreciate its commercial value, and they weren't interested. So promptly I submitted a planning application for museums in September 91 and served notice on Property Holdings and BT. I was now taken rather more seriously. But the application on the Property Holdings part of the land was rejected because one cannot make planning applications on Crown land, which I didn't know at the time. Anyway, the Bletchley Archaeological Society, Historical Society, formed a steering committee to help organise a 19th of October reunion, to which many of you who are present here came last year in '91. And the purpose of this was, first of all, to raise awareness of the threat to the park, but also to commemorate the anniversary of the letter which some of the senior staff in the park sent to Winston Churchill saying, please give us the resources to do the job, and Winston Churchill wrote across it, action this day, or something to that effect, and that was actually done, and the resources flowed through. So, luckily, a large number of the original signatories to that letter are still with us, and they concocted a new letter in a similar vein and sent it to John Major. We had some 140 of the original code breakers at that gathering in the 19th of October, and they charged the steering committee with setting up the trust and saving the park. Well, the trust is now set up and it now has charitable status. So, if I could have slide number 1. Nowadays it's customary, so my younger colleagues tell me, to have a mission statement. I'm not quite sure what it means, and I think if we had to work out a mission statement in 1940, the length of time they spend on it nowadays would have prohibited us doing very much. However, mission statements are the witty phrase, and ours is quite simple: to save Bletchley Park for the nation. And that's a very simple and straightforward mission statement, which didn't actually take very long to work out. So what is the method of achieving that end? We want to record the history of the park, to thoroughly investigate the current status of the park, and then to put together trust proposals for museums, and that's the way I'll structure the rest of this short talk. So, if we now move on to sorry, the light's gone down, I can't read my notes. Check glasses. It's better. It's one of these, going past the sell-by date, you have to have bifocals, and that really screws things up. Now, one of the ways in which one can begin to establish something is to establish values or something. Now, Sir Harry Kinsley has indicated the historical value of the work done at the park. I'd like to just run through some of the value of the physical state of the park and the people who worked there. BP, as most of you know, is situated about 50 miles outside London and is now in Milton Keynes. It has very good physical access, both north-south on the railway line and the A5, and east-west, equally situated between Oxford and Cambridge. And that was why it was chosen in 1938 as the home of out-of-town code-breaking. Now, the estate was originally owned by the Leon family, and here we have a picture of the mansion as it was in the early 1900s. And this is what the mansion looks like now. And one thing I will say is that the present owners, British Telecom, have in fact maintained the structure of the mansion in an exemplary fashion, which is extremely well preserved inside and outside. It's set in parklands, quite pleasant parklands. Some of you may remember the parklands. Perhaps they weren't quite as like that during the wartime. Now, the first group of code breakers went into the plum store, and this was the plum store in which the first code breakers were set, and that's the cottage at the end there. Now, what this was all about was the Enigma machine, And there we have a picture of the Enigma machine. I don't intend to go into details of it, that's another talk another time. In any case, the majority of the people here know all about it, a lot more than I do. Now, what I want to show you is the build-up of the wartime sites. And if we have the slide on projector number 2, this is the wartime plan of the park, and this shows the build-up of the various parts. The outline of the park is around here, and just to orientate yourself, this is Wilton Avenue here, and there's the mansion. Now, the first group of huts built was this group in here, and this group here has been demolished. But I was talking to some people earlier, and they confirmed that part of it at least was the Nappick canteen. The expansion was very rapid once the code breakers began to get into the Enigma code, and so the next phase of expansion was the main group of huts around here, and here we see the huts as they are today, and Hut 3, Hut 6, and this is the end of Hut 1, which is just at the end there, and Hut 8 is over on the side here. And another view of the huts shows the back of Hut 6, which it looks in rather a bad shape, but I can assure you it's because of some incompatibility between the paint which somebody used a few years ago and the underlying Canadian pine for which the hut is built. The hut itself is perfectly good condition, it's just the paint peeled off. Following the expansion of the huts, the work expanded even further, and the next stage was the development of the bomb. This derived from the Polish work on a mechanical method of doing an exhaustive search for the keys based on cribs and menus. And the bomb, the first bombs were in the building here, Hut 11. Now, this immediately indicates the problem which some people in authority had when we talked about huts in the original proposals from the Bletchley Archaeological Society for listing of the buildings. They thought they were all the wooden structures we've seen previously, whereas of course, as you all know, these are huts as well. And these are certainly not wooden huts. They're very heavily reinforced, bomb-proof buildings with very, very thick roofs, and they certainly aren't huts. So when the DOE in its wisdom said, oh, well, you can move these huts to Duxford or somewhere, it's not really possible to move a building like that to Duxford. And there's the interior of Hut 11, and you can just see the thickness of the roof structure there, which you probably remember is extremely thick. And these were the windows, which were the only method of exit in case something went wrong in the building. So that's the bomb huts. Then there was a rapid expansion through the teleprinter building here, which brought the landlines in, landline connections in, and then through into the other blocks, block D, that's the front of the D block. And here we see the 1943 plan, which we have acquired in some very scientific way, of the park. And this shows all the buildings in 1943, and here's D block over here, and we have a panoramic view of D block taken from the hill just over there on the side. And these buildings were very extensive, as you all know, they were quite large size. So that was the expansion into that. Now, another phase of the work in Bletchley Park was not only the Enigma machine, but the Geheimschreiber. And here we have a picture of the Geheimschreiber. We actually have one at the back of the room there on loan from the Science Museum. And it was the breaking of this code which led to, first of all, the testary, then the numinary, and then Colossus and Robinson. Here's Colossus, and the buildings which housed Colossus was F block up here, and here is the picture of the arch over the roadway into F block, which is in there, and then we have a picture of looking down the side of F block down the road down here. The reason why these pictures are rather fuzzy, is that F block has been demolished. Now, the Colossus was, as has been said, the first large vowel computer, built in 1943, 1,500 vowels, led by the team designed by the team led by Tom Flowers and Doris Hill. This is H block here, and this is where F block was, there, next point. And in here we had the Mark II Colossus, which actually had 2,500 vowels, and was a vast improvement on the Mark I. When we came to look at the 1943 map, we found some rather peculiar buildings just down here on the map, which said Bath House. And we couldn't quite understand why you needed, and there were a number of these around the place, bath houses. And it wasn't until we realised that it was because of all the heat generated in these buildings by the Colossus machines and the large numbers of valves that baths and showers were really required very frequently. I believe somebody did mention to me that there was a suggestion that Wren should go topless, but I don't think that was ever actually implemented. So that is the 1943 map, and now we have the aerial shot of 1946, which I'm afraid you won't be able to see very much of. There are, we have got some gloves of this. And it's upside down, quite right, I'm sorry. And there's Walton Avenue there, and there's F block down there. But what is interesting to see from that is what's actually left and what's gone. Now what's gone is the group of huts here, which is which were the first huts. Those huts, 14 in there, which were alongside the telephone room. Hut 7 went fairly either at the end of the war or just after the war, or perhaps even during the war. And then the biggest loss, of course, is F block here, which was demolished in 1987. But that still leaves 75% of the original buildings still in the park, still in reasonably good structural condition, although vandalized in some places, but still very much usable. So what about the people who worked in the park and what went on there? The figures vary, but about 12,000 people worked in the park towards the end of the war. It's quite remarkable that the secrecy was kept for 40 years about the park and what went on there. And of course there are no official records. So the Trust is faced with the daunting task of piecing together what went on in the park. And because, as those of you who were there know, the need to know basis was very much enforced. Very often, with the best will in the world, you only know what you did, or perhaps what your local environment did. There are very few people, if anybody, alive now who knows the whole picture of what went on in the whole organisation of the park. And we are having to put that all together. It's rather ironic that during the war, within the park, was the greatest card index system ever built in the world of the Axis forces. We are having to put back together a card index system of what went on in the park in order to piece that back together again. So that is what we're faced with doing. But of course, one hardly need say that the memories of you people who were there is a vanishing resource. And that's one of the reasons why the Trust wants to act now to make certain that we capture that information before it's lost. There are some 550 individual rooms shown on this 1943 plan, and when you see the plan on the wall there, you'll be able to see that you can actually see all the rooms donated. And it is my aim to have a plaque on each room saying, put the names of people who worked in that room during the war. We have so far collected a list of some 1,400 names, just over, of the people who worked there, and we're busy trying to extend that list So anybody with lists of names of people who work there would be delighted to hear from them. And when we acquire the park, we want to have weekend sittings in the buildings to be able to thoroughly work out what went where and to make sure we got it right. So the key points. So that was the need to acquire the park, and we have an aerial photograph showing the park as it is today. And here's the green outline of the park, and again, that's on one of the boards over there. This is the park as it is now. And what is important is who owns what in the park. And here we have a slide showing the breakdown of the areas. And the green area around here is owned by British Telecom. The central area here is owned by the government property holdings. And as you can see, they're rather knitted together, and that area of their factories, that's also owned by the government. Also, this slide shows the conservation area which the local authority has placed on the park in order to assist in its preservation. Now, when I became involved with the steering management committee way back in October, November last year, I met for the first time Councillor Roger Bristow, who's here with us, who was an ex-mayor of Milton Keynes. And he and I began to spend many hours trying to work out ways in which we could viably construct a museum campus within the park. And Roger brought to this the knowledge of the Milton Keynes ethos of the balancing package. And that is that within a square on Milton Keynes, the commercial activity supports the leisure activity. And Roger convinced me that this was going to be possible with the park, and eventually we came up with the whole park concept. Originally my scheme had been to just purchase from property holdings that central portion there, which included the prime huts 3, 6 and 8. But Roger convinced me that if we went for the whole park scheme, then we could make the thing work. And the reason it works is because within the park there is 300,000 square feet of usable building space in all the old buildings there. The museum provision only needs something like 100,000 square foot, so we have 200,000 square foot of lettable space, and that was the key to making the thing work. The other part of the equation was that working at the Science Museum, I had a lot of contact with Dr. Neil Cossens, who's given me a lot of advice and help in running up this project, and his firm advice as somebody who started a number of different museums is don't rely on visitor numbers. And so the package which Roger and I put together showed that the whole concept was viable right from the start, even if we didn't get one visitor in through the door. The visitors would help, but we could actually start the project going on this balancing package concept. And that was very important. And so by December 91 we had a business plan, a financial analysis, which Roger and I built up, and now I'd like to indicate to you what the Trust will do with the park when we acquire it. We want, as the chairman has said, to provide a museum campus. And the museum's cryptology, computing, radar and air traffic control, and other museums. So we just looked very quickly through those. Here's the plan produced by David Hartley, who's our architect consultant to the Trust. And this shows the build-up of the various areas. Now, I'm going to talk about these quickly in order. Cryptology, first of all. And the Museum of Cryptology will contain the following items. First of all, a visitor centre. And the visitor centre will be here, so it will be here in the, by the car. The Hut F will be the car park area. It seems a sad use for such an important site, but it's quite important to have an area where people can park their cars, even if they are parking it on the coast of Colossus. This will be the visitor centre, and that will be a wall mural representation of what went on in the park and the water activities, and give the visitor an orientation. Then the next part is the huts reenactment part here, and that will be huts 3, 6 and 8 restored to their 1942 state. And we can show you the sort of thing that that would look like by looking at the war rooms in London. And this is the sort of thing which can be done by getting the original furniture and putting it back to the next, to look like the original buildings. Next one, please. And here's another view of the interior of the cabinet war rooms. So that group of huts there will be turned into a look in the window. This is where it actually happened, and this is what it looked like at the time. That's the huts reenactment centre there. Now, in addition to that, what I plan is a cryptology trail, and that will be in D block here, in this wing here. And this will give the visitor the experience of going through cryptology. And coming in at the start of the building here, they will see a message sent from a German command post enciphered on Enigma. They'll then see it sent by radio transmitter, intercepted in an intercept station, dispatch rider to Bletchley. That gives the children a chance to ride on a motorbike. And then when it gets to Bletchley, booked into the booking-in rooms, and then going to the breaking rooms where the key is broken. And I intend to use the Jeffries sheet method of showing the key breaking, because that's rather simple and easy to do. Then when the message has been, the key has been broken, handle winding through the Type-X machines, which some of you will remember, and then out at the far end into the watch and the sanitizing of the message and giving the message back to the visitor at the end of the trail, so that the visitor can experience the whole of the code-breaking sequence that went on in Bletchley Park. That's the cryptology trail. The third leg of the museums. Sorry, that is the section on the cryptology museums. And then the other side of it is that I want to have a museum of computing, and the museum of computing will be this yellow section in here, and that will be working in conjunction with the Science Museum in London, and will have on loan equipment from the Science Museum. This is the Pegasus computer, which I and members of the Conservation Society have restored back to full working order. That was built in 1956 and is now fully operational. Now that sort of work will go on in here, and the machines will come down from London and be refurbished and then go back into the museum gallery in the Science Museum in London for exhibition. This will not be primarily an exhibition centre for computing, but a research, archive and restoration centre. As part of that work, I intend to build a working replica of the Mark I Colossus. I have the cooperation of the powers that be in doing this, and in most in particular, I have the cooperation of the engineers and designers who are still alive, who actually did the work and can help me to do it. I also want to produce a working replica of the Manchester prototype computer, which ran the first stored program in the world. These replicas, I think, are very important because a lot of the original equipment is lost. Doesn't mean to say that we can't produce a replica and give people the experience that they would have had if they had the real thing. So that's computing, and then there will also be museums of air traffic control, we hope, and radar as well. This is the CAA air traffic control training building, and the CAA, who are in the park in this central portion here, are very interested in joining us in a museum of air traffic control and radar. Now, having said that, we also have a lot of spare capacity for space, particularly in D block here, and it is my hope that in conjunction with our good friends at the Royal Corps Signals at Blandford and Imperial War Museum and others, we will be able to put on special exhibitions within this area of associated activities of intelligence work and military side as well. And last but not least, we wish to use C block down here for a museum for new towns. And this is appropriate since Milton Keynes is the area in which the whole project is situated, and we have the support of Milton Keynes Marketing and the CNT and Milton Keynes Borough, and we feel we should acknowledge that support and help with a museum to new towns in C Block here. So that is the plans. What I would end on is a plea that we do it now rather than later. The buildings are deteriorating, they are getting vandalised, and what's more important, it's so important to unlock the memories of the people who worked there, and as experience has shown, that only occurs when people actually go on site and can say with some enthusiasm, that's where I worked, and this is who worked with me in that room, and that is very exciting, and I want that to happen. And that can only happen if we have unlimited access to the site and if we've acquired it. If we don't acquire it, then what is likely to happen is that. And that, is the demolition of F Block in 1987, and the next slide shows that further demolition. That was F Block being demolished in 1987. That is the fate that awaits the park unless we get the support to save it. And on that note, I'll end my
Thank you, Tony. I think it's just perhaps worth me saying that those are the first time, and the only pictures that the Trust have. It's the first time that they've ever been shown publicly, and they are literally the only pictures that the Trust have of F Block. And they came from an amateur video of the demolition. Very interesting. The other thing I wanted to point out, and was just to say how good things are if they've gone past their sell-by date. It occurred to me while Tony was saying that the Trust has actually been in operation 6 months. Just think of the value. 24 days work for all of that. To go on from there, I want to introduce another gentleman who's passed his sell-by date, and he's threatened to kill me if I said that. This is Ted Ennemer, who's the Chief Executive of the Trust Management Committee, and he's going to introduce the appeal. Ted.
Ladies and gentlemen, yes, I will kill him when I get him outside. My children keep telling me I'm coming close to my sell-by date, but my problem is I'm a Peter Pan, and as fast as they stamp it on with that hand, I've got it out with that. However, having said that, can I welcome you all here tonight? But just to say, very first and initially, to remind you perhaps and me of a story told by my cricketing master at school many years ago. He used to look at me with that beady eye that schoolmasters have, and he would say, "Never bat down the order, boy, because when you do, if you make a good stroke, they've already seen it." So I make no apology, ladies and gentlemen, for saying that some of the things you will hear from me tonight are merely reiterations from my chairman and Tony Sale. Now, you will have seen from Tony Sale's presentation the detail of the campus plan for Bletchley Park. But museums in this day and age can be expensive to run and generate little income in return. This will not be the case in Bletchley Park, where we intend to use the state-of-the-art technology to keep curatorial and running costs to a minimum, and where commercial, income-generating enterprises on site financially assist the overall development and eventual completion of the scheme. 3 major factors already on site make the whole scheme very viable, and should any of them not come to fruition, the scheme can still remain workable. And those 3 factors are the mansion, acting as a 1940s ambience hotel, existing occupiers remaining on site, the residential training accommodation built by British Telecom being used as student accommodation within the framework of museum and educational activities compatible with the Trust's aims and objectives. There are, of course, other factors which could come into play to ensure the viability if necessary. But you will appreciate that at this stage, the Trust would not wish to reveal the total detail of its business plan. However, what I can reveal is that that basis, that plan, is unashamedly the balancing package so adroitly used by the former Milton Keynes Development Corporation in the development of the city of Milton Keynes over the past 25 years. So monies raised by this £7 million international appeal launched tonight will therefore directly underpin the museums, both by releasing revenue raised from the commercial activities and by providing some of the capital needed for restoration and the establishment of the museum campus. In addition, of course, as Tony has mentioned, we shall actively seek sponsorship for museums or areas of museums, returning to those interested parties all the benefits that sponsorship can bring. We have done our sums very, very carefully and have had those sums looked at by Touche Ross, again, as you've already heard. We will be going forward to discuss the business plan in detail very shortly with a major bank whose corporate assessors have expressed great interest in the project and a willingness to be involved. So we need to raise monies for both the potential purchase of the park and the development of the museums. We have asked government for single tender status regarding the purchase, but have been told that this is not government policy. It will go to open tender. Government also appears to be prevaricating somewhat in that the timetable for disposal keeps getting pushed further and further back. That may be understandable within the current state of the property market, but it is not being fair to this trust, which has only access to limited day-to-day funding. In addition, we need to acquire the park quickly to better establish research involving personnel employed at the park, for, and with respect to those with us tonight, they are not getting any younger, and we have already lost many from our midst. Speedy acquisition will also help to deter some vandalism which is beginning to creep in. But it is really a pity, I feel, that Bletchley Park and all it stands for is in effect just to be auctioned off. What an ignominious end to it all, and what a snub to the memory of those who by intellect, not guns and bullets, shortened the Second World War and saved thousands of lives on both sides. If government is serious in wanting to protect and enhance our national heritage, a move the Trust fully endorses and welcomes, and as apparently evidenced by the recent appointment of the Heritage Minister David Mellor, then I would respectfully ask government to lead the way in this appeal by being generous and donating its holding in Bletchley Park to the nation under the stewardship of this trust, so that it might be administered as a national asset. This would be a magnificent gesture from government and would afford the site the commemorative respect it so richly deserves from us all. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have much pride and pleasure in declaring this £7 million appeal open. Bletchley Park must and will be saved. To those of you who have already contributed, many, many thanks. To those others, as the chairman said, please help us. Members of the Trust Management Committee are seated over at that side at the back of the hall and will help you with pledges or other financial arrangements, and deeds of covenant are also available. And should you so wish, might I ask you please as well to sign a petition to the Prime Minister calling on government to donate the park to the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time this evening and for your undoubted and obvious very deep interest in the project that we're trying to take forward. Thank you.
time for us to try and answer any questions that you may have. But before we try to do that, can I just introduce Roger Bristow? Stand up, Roger. The General Manager of the Trust. He's going to come up here. He's an expert. So I'm dragging him on stage now so that he can answer some of the questions we've Tony. Are there any questions?
Put Sir Harry Hinsley or somebody, put us in the picture of the history of the de-securitization of Bletchley. Because I understood that when people served there, they were sworn to complete secrecy. And then suddenly one discovered books being written and published. And apparently there was some announcement in Hansard, I think, in the 1970s. What exactly is the present position about what restrictions, if any, remain?
The position is that when some information about the wartime Bletchley began to leak, as they now say, it appeared in books in the middle of 1972 and 73, the government took a decision, first of all, to let an official history be written of the results of Bletchley's work. At the time that it gave permission for the histories to be published, which was, I think, in 78 or 9, the government made a statement in the House of Commons to the effect that this was being done, that the histories had been allowed access to all the records, but that inmates, wartime inmates of Bletchley, were still expected to respect their undertaking under the Official Secrets Act in respect of technicalities and the methods which had been used to obtain their results. That is a fair summary of what the Prime Minister or Foreign Secretary said in the House of Commons in 1979. And as I understand it, that's still the position. The technicalities we are supposed still to keep close to our hearts. But all the information about the results, not only now in official history, the results are actually put into the public record of it as fast as, or as slowly, as you might say, the British government manpower shortages permit. They're moving the decrease. And now, for example, they're moving the Joint Intelligence Committee, which is one of the four bodies that assess the decrease. All these materials are now moving to the public record office in state. And we still have only this one requirement, that we don't talk more than has been published already about the technicalities of our work, because I understand that's the
Does that just apply to the war with Germany, or does that apply to those of us who worked in another sector?
applying, as I understand, to the whole of the Second World War, and I believe the United States has adopted the same position.
How serious is the threat for the demolition of the park?
Roger would say that. I'm afraid it's very serious.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, indeed, the threat to Bletchley Park is extremely serious. It is my understanding that a submission has been made on Monday of this week for the complete demolition of all buildings on the park for the development of 35 hectares of housing. You will see that at least 50% of the park is already covered by a conservation area order. I understand there will be a recommendation from English Heritage that that conservation area be extended to cover the whole of the wartime buildings and areas of interest in the park. I would expect that application to be heard within the Borough Council's planning department and committee within the next 2 months. I am fearful that the forces that come into play may actually be quite considerable. But the thing that I'm extremely fortified by is the all-party political support on the local council to resist any request for demolition of those buildings of wartime importance within the conservation area. And I would suspect that the planning committee on the Borough Council would seriously consider extending, if that is a recommendation from English Heritage, the conservation area. I have managed to solicit, since I had that information, the views of people from other parties on the borough, and I can confirm that that is the position, that they will be resisting such requests for demolition on those buildings. It is very serious, it is a very real threat, but I think, as you've seen from Sir Harry and the other people that are here tonight, there was clearly a national site of importance there, an international site of importance, according to Hans Meckel, Admiral Dönitz, Chief Enciphering Officer, when we interviewed him in January. He thinks it is a site of international importance, and so do I. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is just worth saying to you that Milton Keynes is in the process of a review, a 10-year review of its strategic plan. The whole of the area has to be reviewed every 10 years and upgraded. In December of last year, officers of the Trust actually lodged an objection for the proposals for demolition of those buildings and for the building of housing and factory units on the site, because it was not compatible with the stated aims either of the Borough Council or the County Council, the Buckinghamshire County Council. That objection has remained, is still lodged, and if all else fails, the issue will go to public hearing about the end of September this year, and the Trust will certainly need resources in order to combat any request by the agents on behalf of the owners of the site to actually demolish those buildings. So if we cannot persuade, or if we cannot persuade them in the meantime to sell it to us, or if we cannot persuade others to have a change of view, then the Trust will certainly need some resources to protect the site.
Charles, so Harry has referred to the help from our Polish picture. Is this being made there with those countries that show that some significant support to us?
Perhaps I can take that one. Yes, indeed it is. Not just with those allies, but with all our allies. And certainly we've had discussions with them and with the American Embassy as well. No, oh, yes, thank you. Yes. The point from our African side was not only the allies, because certainly there is support from this from the Germans and from the other side during the war. They're very interested and very impressed with the work that went on. We're actually amazed when they found out what you had done.
Could you tell me what's the attitude of British Telecom to the proposal? Are they willing to collaborate?
We have written formally to British Telecom asking, as we have with the Government Property Holdings Department, for single tender status. I can inform you that we have been notified by British Telecom's Property Department that the site will go out jointly with Property Holdings to the highest bid. This has always been a major problem for the Trust. We would like to have the site donated to the nation and for the Trust to manage that. However, we realise that commercial considerations have to be made. And we have always made it clear that we were prepared to pay a fair and honest price to pay for the park. Indeed, to the extent that when we set out on this venture, we said that we would not do it in a slipshod manner, and we believe that we have one of the two top valuation agents who have actually carried out a valuation for the trust. I'm obviously not prepared to disclose what that valuation is in order to protect the trust's interest. But we know what the site is worth. We have always made it clear that we are prepared to pay for that. However, what we are told is that it will go out, to use the phrase, to a shootout at the OK Corral, and we cannot match the resources of large corporate organisations that may actually want to land bank or may actually want to pay well over the odds. Obviously, our resources are not finite, not infinite.
So Harry,
in view of the statement about us not disclosing any technical information, I find myself at a bit of disadvantage when you say that we're going to build a replica of Colossus.
Yes, that I have investigated that quite carefully. The current position, I am told by whispers, is that it's perfectly all right for me to build a machine. It is not all right for me to disclose, or anybody else to disclose, the algorithms that were used on that machine for breaking the code. To build a machine, we can run toy algorithms on it. We cannot run the real algorithms.
please.
Yes, quite definitely. Yes, quite absolutely. In fact, we have a very large list of the Y station operators, and also, of course, the outstations that work the bonds, which are very significant. Stanmore, Eastcote, and other places, Wellington and Crawley, and all of those will be commemorated. This is to commemorate the whole effort of intelligence gathering, code breaking, and dissemination of the information.
Yes.
Have you enlisted the help of the University of Buckinghamshire? I believe the Vice-Chancellor is last Minister for Museums but one, Richard Luce, and I believe Mrs. Thatcher, or rather Baroness Thatcher, is the Chancellor.
Just recently appointed. I don't think she's yet visited, has she? But I take the point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one of the points which didn't come across, I think, in due respect, on the address of the museum provision. The southern half of the site, between Wilton Avenue and D Block, for those of you who remember, we are actually going to recreate a 1943 ambience. And it is quite surprising the number of vehicles that are already lined up to actually come on there. So when you come onto the site, you'll actually come back into an army camp, as it was in 1943. And I'm sure that that will be a major selling point for a lot of the tourists.
Mr. Chairman, in the outline of the development plan, I understand that you envisage some commercial activities as an integral part to make it viable. Are we to assume that the sort of commercial activities will be geared towards the level of visitor interest in the museums, or will there be any activities which attract people into the site, apart from the people who come with the interest in the museum part?
Thank you. There will be commercial activity compatible with the park. In other words, there will be some commercial activity. There will also be a hotel complex on the park. So the answer is twofold. It's both ways. Yes, there will be some office type activity, and there will be activity which brings people onto the park as well. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today.
I'm absolutely staggered by the number of people that turned up. Just thank you very much indeed. I hope you will take time to look at the displays as you think. And as Ted said, there are members of the Trust Management Committee here, willing, able, and they've all been told to twist your arms severely and to take donations from you. Thank you for coming. Further than that, there's a booklet